Okay, have you ever stopped to think about this? In the ancient world, two absolutely massive disruptions seem to happen right around the same time. First, the human body just stops living for so long. And second, our ability to communicate with each other completely shatters. Well, today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating idea that connects them both as a story of, believe it or not, broken code. So let's just dive right into the numbers here, because they're pretty staggering. Before the biblical flood, you see these lifespans of over 900 years. But right after, something dramatic changes. I mean, look at this steep, sharp drop-off. You go from Noah at 950 years to his son Shem at 600, and then just a few generations later, Peleg is down to 239. By the time you get to Abraham, it's 175. This is not a slow, gentle decline. It's like falling off a cliff. Something fundamental in our biology appears to have just broken. But here's the thing. This biological meltdown wasn't happening in a vacuum. The sources we're looking at today point out that while the very code of human life was apparently failing, another absolutely essential information system was also heading for its own catastrophic collapse. So let's open our first case file, the body itself. The source material frames this in a really modern way. It's not just that people were getting old faster. It suggests a failure of biological information, a bug, if you will, in the code itself. I mean, the evidence for this breakdown is pretty stark. When you drop from almost 1,000 years to just over 100, it points to a major loss of biological integrity. Now, the source suggests this could be from genetic degradation, maybe mutations sped up by a radically different environment after the flood. But honestly, whatever the exact mechanism, the key takeaway is this. The information system that keeps us alive, our DNA, was becoming unstable. It was failing. Now let's turn to our second case file, and you'll see how these two stories start to build on each other. We're talking about the one everybody knows, the Tower of Babel. And here, we're not seeing a breakdown of biological information, but of cultural information. The text for this event is just incredibly direct. It describes a deliberate surgical intervention. Unlike the slow decay of lifespans, this was a sudden, targeted shattering of humanity's single greatest tool for getting things done together. A single, unified language. And this right here is where the parallel becomes so powerful. See, language isn't just a bunch of words. It's a deeply complex, encoded system of information. It's how we pass on culture, technology, and shared goals, kind of like how DNA passes on biological instructions. So when you fragment language, you're not just making it harder to order a coffee. You are shattering the very software that holds a civilization together. So let's just lay it all out, side by side. On one hand, you have the lifespan collapse. That's a breakdown in the genetic biological code, and the result is degeneration. On the other hand, you have the Tower of Babel, a breakdown in the linguistic, cultural code, and the result is division and confusion. It's two different information systems, breaking down in the same era with remarkably similar chaotic outcomes. So when you're looking at these two massive, simultaneous crises, you have to ask, why? Was this just God punishing humanity for its pride and sin? Or, and this is what the source material argues, was there something much, much deeper going on here? Maybe even something strategic? And that question brings us to the absolute core of the argument today. The idea that these events, which on the surface look like pure, harsh judgment, could actually be seen as acts of divine mercy, a strategic intervention with a hidden, deeper purpose. The source points us to this verse, which actually shows up before the flood. It suggests that shortening lifespans was a premeditated move. The logic is, if humanity is spiraling into corruption, limiting the amount of time any one person has to do damage is, in a way, an act of mercy. It puts a hard ceiling on how much evil can compound over centuries in one lifetime. So here's the critical point. Both the biological breakdown and the cultural breakdown were essentially doing the same job. They were acting as brakes. They were slowing down the momentum of a unified human rebellion, preventing the kind of runaway corruption that had apparently happened before the flood. You could think of it as this brilliant two-pronged strategy. You've got one big problem, centralized human rebellion. So intervention number one, shorten lifespans. That limits the impact a single evil individual or generation can have over time. Intervention number two, confuse the languages. That scatters humanity and limits the ability of evil to organize and spread across space. It wasn't just random chaos. It was a strategic decentralization. But here's the thing. The story doesn't just end there, with everything broken and scattered. The source argues that these acts of restraint were just a phase. They were designed to redirect human history and set the stage for an eventual restoration of the very information systems that were broken. And this comparison is just so powerful. At Babel, you have human pride leading to confusion, and everyone scatters. But centuries later, at Pentecost, you get this incredible symbolic reversal. The divine spirit doesn't erase all the different languages. It miraculously bridges the gap between them. Language is suddenly clarified, not confused, and people from all those scattered nations are brought together to hear one single unified message. And this vision of the ultimate goal makes it even clearer. The point was never to just go back to one language or one empire. Instead, it's about bringing that rich diversity created at Babel into a new kind of harmony, a unity based on a shared purpose that goes way beyond culture or language. So when you pull the camera back, you see this massive story arc of restoration. The gospel message is meant to unite what the language is divided, and through the promise of resurrection, the very biological code that began to fail, our flesh, is also promised a final fix. Both the cultural code and the biological code are put on a path to being made whole again. So to wrap it all up, the idea here is that these two giant collapses were a kind of constructive disorder. They look like absolute chaos from the ground, right? But from a wider perspective, they acted as a necessary intervention, a divine course correction that steered the whole human story away from self-destruction and pointed it back toward hope. And that, of course, leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. If our biology, our very life, and our cultures are fundamentally information systems, divine code, what would a complete restoration of that code even look like? It's a huge idea that reframes not just how we see the past, but how we might think about our own future.